The seat for the stool overhangs the frame, usually around an inch in each direction. It can run a little bit longer in this direction, but not wider this way. It looks funny if it hangs out too far out here in the short dimension. The way I calculate the length of it, I just take a ruler, and if I want an inch overhang on each end, I'll put a 2-inch mark here, and then look at my stool and it comes to 16 inches. In that case, I might make a little longer overhang on the ends, so say 2.5 inches, 16.5. In this way, I just want the 1 inch, so I'll put 2 inches here, and I see 10.25 right there. Check it, should be the same here, and it is. So 10.25 by 16.5 is what I'm after. And that's a pretty big piece of wood for riving your blank out of a log. To get a radially split piece that wide, you need a tree that's about 30 inches in diameter. And I don't have any ribbon stock on hand that's that wide right now. I do save quarter sawn wide stuff when I can, and this piece of white oak is left from some tables I built where I bought a lot of really very wide quarter sawn white oak. This is thick, it's 6/4, so I'll have to knock down its thickness a great deal, but that's not a big deal. This was cut on a bandsaw mill on a wood miser, and it was a huge tree. And this stuff is 13.5 inches from that waney bit. Well, that's not wane, but from that middle right there out to just under the sapwood. So I know I have my 10.5, 10.25, 10.5 inches of width. That's fine. But one thing I like to do with this rough stock like that is it's easy to say, oh, that's my width, I'll just cut my length here and then rip down the width. But I want to see what it looks like first. And I don't need to finish planing that, but I want to just take my scrub plane and clean up some of that surface so there's no surprises. I'm going right across the board. That doesn't matter, especially, like I said, I'm going to take this thickness down so dramatically. It's really just to see if there's any little hidden surprises under that staining and patination from age. There was a little discoloration in this log. There had been some iron in it at one point. And so I've been dressing that side. I've got this side mostly cleaned up so I can see it. And a couple of things stood out. One is there was a very big knot right here. And the whole interior part's going to get cut off anyway. But that has affected the fibers have sort of swept around here. So it had to be a huge knot to get that much distortion in this big tree. The grain is much straighter, the fibers are much more straight up this end, but this log had laid around so long that there's even some insect damage in the heartwood, which is unusual. If it was a stool for my house, I wouldn't care about that. This stool's for a client. So I'd like it without the insect holes. So I'll cut the seat out of this end There is some very figured grain there, which a lot of woodworkers really like. I hate. I want this wood to be as bland as can be, but you take what you get. And so I'll cross cut it and then show you how I rip it. And then I'll dress that down and start to form the plank that'll make the seat. If this were a stock that I had split out, I'd be perfectly happy splitting off this piece of waste. But because it's sawn, I don't quite know how this wood's going to behave, or I know it's not going to behave the way I want it to. I'm going to rip it off with a rip saw. And I keep a block of beeswax right here above the bench and always run it down the teeth of the saw when I start. And I'll just lightly drag it on that far corner, holding the saw at an angle like that, but then as soon as I can, I'll hold it upright in two hands like this. That hand is just sort of looped through the handle, my thumb here on the bottom of it. And then a saw like this for a couple of reasons. One, I can use both arms instead of just one. And by holding the saw this way, I can see very clearly my line. Whereas here, it's a little bit, you can still see it, but it's a little harder. And so it just helps me to steer. If I get off track and start to drift away from the line, then I just cock the handle. If I want to go to my right, I'll cock that part of the handle to my left and take just a few strokes and it'll start to come back. And then you have to relax the saw or you'll overcorrect. Same principle. If I need to come this way, I just twist the handle a little bit. As it's happening right now, I'm tracking on the line. So. There. And just like that, I'm not cold anymore. But just to show you the setup for planing the long edges of the stool seat, it's just a sliding dead man, it's called, with a peg in it. That peg happens to have a big round head on it. Here it's just propped up, sitting on a holdfast, but the holdfast isn't holding it. And then this screw in the bench screw is just kind of pinching it there. It's still wiggly. So you have to be careful on the end of your stroke that it doesn't pivot up and hit you in the chin. And I had planed that edge and then marked out my width. You can throw this holdfast on it, and that makes it a little more agreeable. And now using a longer plane, and you can see there the motion with my feet back on that back foot and then lean forward. And I need to take more off this end than that right now. And I'm almost there. call that done. So just mark square ends and trim that. There's no need to see that. I've planed one side of that board and got it pretty flat and checked it with a straight edge this way and winding sticks that way, and it's where I like it, where it's good enough. But it's, as I mentioned earlier, grossly thick. It is now in parts over 1.25 inches, and I wanted to finish at 3/4 of an inch. So I have a lot of wood to remove, and people are often concerned about planing that much stock by hand. I'll show you how I thickness something like this. So I've set my marking gauge, and we'll just run a line all the way around the whole board from that face that I planed, and you can see how much wood there is to come off. It's quite a bit, but it shouldn't be a problem. Just being careful to keep the stock, the fence of the marking gauge up against that face, and dress that all around. And now I'll use a couple different methods. One is to just pinch this against my planing stop, grab that with a hold fast. The fibers are running this way. I'm dealing across the board right now. So I'm going to start with this scrub plane or foreplane, and it has curved iron. This plane was made by my friend Bill Anderson and carved by me. And so I'm working across the board, but I'm skewing the plane and really planing a long bevel from about here across to the end. And then I scooch down and check my marking gauge line. Like that. Closer, so a little more. And you can see I'm just off that line. I could take a hair more, and in fact I will. Might not even need the whole basket. Hit it right in the middle, a little high there, and the edge is still. And I'll do the same on this end. You can see I was saving that board for a joint stool. So, it looks funny. Now I'll work on the long edges, and can do pretty much the same thing. I guess I could grab it here. Doesn't hurt any too. So now in these longer strokes, I'm trying to get my feet involved as well. I'm using my arms, but also just rocking back and forth to try to use my whole body there. It's higher here. It's hard to come onto it. A little more right there. see, the gist of this is to work all of these edges, and then I'll be taking the middle down across the grain to get the thickness down, finish it off. Oh, you heard me cackle, and here is that rippled grain. It's sort of almost fiddleback grain in the oak right there. That doesn't want to plane, it just wants to rip. It should be coming the other way. So let me try that. Get the whole fast out of the way. That's better. A little bit more up here near my end. And all this is just to thickness the board. This isn't shaping the seat. I've not cut it to size. It's still a little oversized. So here you can see the bevels I've created on the long side, short side, this long side. And now it's just a matter of laying it on the bench top and planing across it, and I can see from up here when I'm down near that desired thickness. I'll still throw that holdfast to just help grab that, but it's just a whole lot of scrub plane work going right across the board. Like that, until you bring that whole sort of humped up field all the way down to the level that I've defined by those bevels. And so I'll bring the rest of that down, and then we'll go on from there. I keep finding more things to show you about planing this thickness down. And one last one maybe is that I was planing sort of diagonally to the long fibers of that board. And I had this last bump right here, and that's where I had a holdfast holding it. If I start planing at that diagonal, I'm going to tear up the grain. It was cutting pretty clean in this direction. So I've got this piece sometimes called a doe's foot, which is just a stick with a corner notch in it. And it's held down to the bench by that holdfast. And then the board is jammed against the bench hook, the toothed planing stop, and then trapped in this piece. So that's kind of a 2-point holding system, and then frees up the board so I can carry on planing in the same direction I was going and get this piece done. But you see it working a little bit loose is worth another Smack there on the hope fan. Nice thing about this system versus a vise is you can just pick it right up and check your progress. So now I've got a bump up in here. All right, closer.